much of today will be allotted to question and answers, so if you have any, you can ask, but not just yet. One of the problems that human beings always have with leaders is how to place them. I think it would be fair, we don't have evidence for this, but I think it would be fair to say that nobody actually starts out worshipping a fellow human being. It just seems to be in contradiction to the human psyche, the human mentality. Human beings are not wired that way, to worship fellow human beings. Well, this is a great blessing. Manna from heaven, see. But they end up that way, don't they? They end up that way. They end up deifying, making gods out of fellow human beings. There are societies that make gods out of supernatural beings. But then how does someone make a god out of a normal human being? I think, and I haven't come across any such study with regard to this, but I think it's fair to say that it starts off with respect. That you start by respecting someone, and then at some point that respect kind of goes up a notch, and it assumes devotion. So you have respect, and then you have devotion. And then ultimately you get to that point where you can't make the distinction between being respectful of someone and deifying that someone, turning that someone into some kind of a god. There is a Hindu guru right now. I forget his name. It'll come to me. Annoying character. Huh?
It's not Baba Ramdev, is it?
No. He started life off as a yoga instructor. And like some of our musallis outside there, he's got a thing for motorbikes.
Oh, right. Sadhguru.
Sadhguru, there we go. So Sadhguru started life off, and if you see his early profiles and pictures, he's a biker. But I think he's getting into that Twilight Zone kind of place right now. Very interesting character. Very smart. He might even be sincere, I don't know. But he's following that trajectory. He's someone who was respectful of Sadhguru as someone who was my yoga teacher, and then he becomes this secular kind of sage, man of wisdom, and he's actually on that same trajectory. He's not assuming postures of having some kind of connection with the other side. He doesn't talk about the other side. He doesn't deny the other side, but he doesn't talk about the other side. So it'd be interesting to see where Sadhguru ends up in the next 5 to 10 years. But I'm saying all of this because when you look at the Quran, and you're looking at the life of the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran, it seems, and I use the word advisedly, the Quran seems to be trying in so many different ways to keep us in check. So to go back to what I said, human beings have a tendency to start off respecting someone, and then being devoted to that someone, and then ascribing supernatural qualities to that someone, and then removing that someone from his position as a human being to something that is suprahuman, more than human. So the Quran, with all its verses, and I will quote some of these verses to you if I can recall all of them, It seems like it's trying to tell you, well, he is this and he's not that. So if I draw a line on here right now, and we'd say that this line here, if you go above this line, then you reach transcendence, right? Transcendence means anything that's above normality. So jinns are transcendent, malaika are transcendent, Allah is transcendent, Jahannam is transcendent, and you understand what transcendence means, right? Immanence means something that's here. It's in this world. And to sum up, we say that human beings start off here, and then before you know it, they slip into the other world with regard to other human beings. I'm waiting for you guys to do the same for me before I leave and go back. And it's not working. So, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, if you look at the verses when they put the verses together, put them all together, you would see he's actually going like, it's like this. So you have a verse of the Quran which says, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ. Kind of a disrespectful verse. Muhammad is nothing but a messenger. Muhammad is nothing but a messenger. Generally, you would not be so, let's be pretty blunt about it. Muhammad is nothing but a messenger. And then goes this, أَفَإِن مَاتَ, is it right? أَفَإِن مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ. And if he dies and he's killed, will you go back to your old ways? So here the Quran is separating between the message and the messenger. The message is eternal, the messenger is not. He has a timeline, it will come to the end. Right? So there's a verse that actually brings him down a notch. And there's a verse that you're going to have to help me, someone should help me with this one. There's a verse which لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي. Do not talk more, do not raise your voices in the presence of Rasulullah. This is not a direct translation or a literal translation, but that's basically what it's saying. Do not raise your voices in the presence of Rasulullah. What do you think that verse is doing? Up or down? That's going up. See that? It is elevating the position of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you realize that this is a 23-year period, and the companions are trying to adjust their relationship and their attitude towards him. You see what I'm saying now? So on the one hand it says this, then it says that. Then there's a verse that says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And we have not sent you, O Muhammad, except as a mercy unto mankind. What do you think that one does? Straight up. You understand? Then there's a verse that says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّبِيُّ لِمَ تُحَرِّمُ مَا أَحَلَّ اللَّهُ لَكَ. Oh Nabi, why do you make haram that which Allah has made halal? Up or down? Down. So you could find about 15 such verses in the Quran, and one either raises him or the other one brings him down. And if you put that into the context that I just described to you earlier on, that human beings all start off with, my relationship to any other human being starts off here, then it goes to respect, then it goes to devotion, then it goes to deification. Then we start worshipping him. After all, Rama was Rama as 2 legs, 2 hands and a brain, right? And Buddha, just Buddha. Buddha tried, the irony with Buddha is Buddha has made a point of separating himself and his idea from 2 things. From a transcendental world, from the other world. Transcendence is not a big thing in Buddhism. God and so on, they're not important. And he himself tried to reduce his position within the whole idea that is Buddhism. Buddhism is more than a religion, it's an idea. Well, guess what happened to Buddha? He was put right on the top. Buddha is now a god. So the human condition, human beings always grapple with this idea. What to do with someone? To what extent do I show respect, devotion, and then ultimately deification? How do we do that? You start with someone who is a pious person, and you start respecting him. And then he dies. And before you know it, there's a cloth over his grave. And then people make a beeline to his grave because they want some kind of assistance from him, or they want to show their devotion to him. You see, those things come about. They don't come about spontaneously. They are things that we gravitate towards that. In a secular society, it's not as common. But I'm sometimes intrigued by when people go to the Lincoln Memorial and you see old Lincoln, the aide, sitting on his chair. I don't think anyone has a spiritual moment there. Love to talk to some ultra right-wing Christian Americans, and they may indeed have a spiritual moment. But India is classic for that, right? So now we have the biggest statue in India. This is fascinating. I'm going to make a point of actually going there to see what kind of rituals are now being practiced around this person. And his name was Vallabhbhai Patel. Huh? At the dam, right? There's a massive, massive, massive statue of him. It's the largest statue in the world, and it was designed to be the largest statue in the world. I am absolutely certain that they have a little fire burning there, and people come and they do their rituals there. And Vallabhbhai Patel, you ask anyone who knows Indian politics, he had nothing specific to religion. He was not a god man. He was not connected to a temple. He was a politician. He sat next to Nehru on the one side, Gandhi on the other side, Abul Kalam Azad on the other. That was Vallabhbhai Patel. I don't know about his religious life. He may have had one. But generally, when you talk about Vallabhbhai Patel, that he's the father of Indian nationalism, with Hinduism in the center. The kind of nationalism you see in India right now, that is his nationalism. That's why they love him so much. So human beings have the tendency, and here you see in the Quran, over 23 years, the Quran is playing the seesaw, saying, yes, he's very great, rahmatan lil alamin. And on the other hand, it says, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ. He is rahmah, but he's also just a messenger. And he makes mistakes. And this is a mistake he made. He made haram, that which is halal. So you see what I'm saying? There are multiple such verses that show you the struggle that the companions had coming to terms with him, locating him. Arab society was lucky in that regard, because the Arab mind, and maybe the Arab mind is still like that, the Arab mind was not inclined to move towards deification. Respect, devotion, deification. It was not inclined towards that. Although I am told, but unfortunately everything is destroyed, so I don't know about the evidence. I am told before Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab undertook his mission in the 1800s, all of Saudi Arabia from east to west was riddled by all kinds of practices. The kind of practices you're going to find in Pakistan, for instance, or you're going to find in parts of Africa, or you're going to find in Bangladesh and so on. So he says that there was a lot of that. But today the Arab mind is, at least the Middle Eastern mind, and the Egyptian mind is not that way. If you want to see the Egyptian mind, you go to Jam. The irony of Egypt is that you have the two of Egypt's most important elements of Islam are right next to each other. So there's a masjid in Egypt called Jami' Hussein, which is also the masjid of the Azhar. And the Azhar is the intellectual capital of, or the intellectual citadel of the Muslim world. One of the oldest universities in the world. And right in front of it is a shrine of, anyone gone to Cairo? No? Right in front of it. So here's the mihrab, you walk around the side, go to the front, you go there, it's the mihrab, and allegedly Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu anhu's head is buried there. So so you can see that coming in there. If you go to Imam Shafi'i's grave, there are lots and lots of people there. You'd think you're in Ajmer. Or some part of Multan and so on. So it's that kind of sense, that sentiment of wanting human beings to be more than human, of wanting human beings to give you a connection to the other world. That is a very human thing. It's something that was always there even in early Islam. So if you take the companions, some of the companions were just rough jacks. So one of them comes to the Prophet ﷺ and literally grabs him by the neck. And he asks him, he's being nice. He says, are you Muhammad? He says, yes. He says, you're the messenger of God? He says, yes. So if I do A, B, C, and D, will I go to Jannah? He said, yeah, if you can let go of my collar, it probably helps somebody. He says, if I do that, it's good enough. He said, yeah, it's good enough. He was respectful. He was respectful. And then during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and the Prophet ﷺ was making wudu, and as the water of the wudu is dripping off his body, the companions are grabbing it. You've probably heard of this story. You see the two different mindsets operating at the same time. Now we speak highly of that. I don't know how Rasulullah saw that. But there were times when he accepted that. He accepted that, I have this is part of who I am. This is part of who I am. I have this connection to this world. And people want to benefit from that as well. And I have to allow them to do that. And I have to be careful that I do not end up there myself. Because I am supposed to be right here. So that's a challenge you will find if you go back to the Quran and look at all these verses. They don't paint a uniform picture of the greatness of the Prophet ﷺ. There are verses that speak highly of him, and there are verses that just humanize him. They just humanize him, and this is, as a human being, abasa wa tawalla, he frowned and he turned away. Who did? The Prophet ﷺ. Who is saying this? The Quran about him. Because he was preoccupied talking to Makkah's hierarchy, and there was a blind person had come to him to ask him something. And Rasulullah ﷺ said, okay, just hang in there. Let me finish talking to these people. Let me finish talking to them, then I'll come back to you. And the Quran says, no, you can't do that. So when you read Abasa wa Tawalla, that is the Quran reprimanding the Prophet ﷺ. So you see this picture emerging of someone whose position in Makkah, whose position in Medina, and whose position in the world at large is not uniform. It is not uniform. It moves in multiple directions. And in my humble opinion, that is the challenge we face as human beings, of coming to terms with people that we respect a great deal, love a great deal, and then we don't know how to cap that. How do you control that? How do you not let that get the better of you? It's a human being. I'll end here, and then we can go to questions and answers. It's not something that's only tied to religion. There was a famous singer in some part of the Muslim world who died. And people died with him. They just committed suicide. Just jumped off the boat. Now, for you, it's mind-boggling. It's just, The most precious thing Allah has given us is life. And to sacrifice your life in that way for something that is entirely secular, something that makes no promises to an afterlife, something that does not connect you to a greater reality, that tells you a great deal about what it means to be human. It tells you a great deal about what it means to be human. I was coincidentally reading the article last night on this Buddhist monk who burnt himself to death. You've probably seen pictures of this. Where the astounding thing about that particular spectacle was that was the dignity in which he died. There wasn't a murmur out of him. Can you imagine how much of pain he was enduring at that point when he was dying and he committed suicide? And he was protesting the government's repression of monks and Buddhism in general. So human beings are, when Allah told the angel that I'm creating a human being, the angel says, well, Lord, that might be not such a good idea. But they didn't quite say that, but you know the story in the Quran, you know. So you're creating people who are going to cause chaos and mayhem. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I know that which you don't. That we are such strange creatures, extremely unusual people. We present a personality, a trajectory that puts us at odds with everything out there. Our behavior is quite often inexplicable. We don't know why we do this. All right, so if you have any questions, you can ask them now. Anything you want to ask, yeah.
So the Prophet, he obviously recognized the weight of the message and the amount of power and influence that he had in his time for the rest of the world and in the hereafter. Do you have any thoughts on why he didn't collapse under the recognition that he has so much power?
Well, actually, he was virtually on the brink of collapse all the time. I have yet to come across any biography that does justice to the stress that the Prophet ﷺ endured as a human being. Tremendous stress. Tremendous stress. Now, if you go into the text to find that stress, it's going to be staring at you. The problem is the text is so sanitized. I made the statement at the beginning, at the outset, and someone stood up and disagreed with me, but I will make it again nonetheless, which is that when we talk about Rasulullah and the companions, the impression we get is like some great Sufi sheikh or a guru sitting, in ceremony, and everyone sitting around him. They're all dressed in white, and the air is filled with perfume and so on. And people can't wait for him to say something so they can just accept and obey and move on. But his life was just filled with intrigue, for example. Intrigue. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we spoke about the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. It's in the Quran. This is not stories I'm making up. It doesn't come from the Shiites. You might say, well, this is a Shia story. This is not a Shia story. These are stories about the wives of the Prophet conniving amongst themselves. And you know how, shouldn't be saying this stuff, you get into trouble for this. But domestic conniving is a serious issue. And then if you have 2 wives involved in it, and if you have 9 or 11 wives involved, can you imagine that? So when we do tafsir of the Quran, we do an injustice to Rasulullah. You quickly go through that and he says, this is what happened and move on. You have to actually live that for a year, 2 years, and think about, oh my God, imagine if somebody had to live this kind of life. Imagine somebody has to live this kind of life, knowing full well that these women are always bickering about something. all kinds of issues. All kinds of issues. You don't want to kind of divulge too much, it borders on the disrespectful. But you want to share some things of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So Rasulullah married this woman and she was extremely beautiful, and the other wives were very concerned. So they plotted against her. I'm going to talk in general terms, so I'm not going to mention any names. And don't come back and ask me what the names are. So he marries this woman, and everyone, the entire prophetic household is walking on eggshells, not knowing, is he going to prefer that, and so on. So one of them says, I'm going to sort this woman out, don't worry. And she sorted her out. So the tradition in the Arab society was that if a new bride came in, and before the bridal night itself, what you call Shab Zufaf in Urdu, the night when your marriages are consummated. So you prepare women for that, beautify them, and so on. So one of these women took it upon themselves to do that, beautify the woman, for the bridal night. And then she just gave her a small piece of advice. She says, Rasulullah really loves that when he walks in, you should say, A'udhu Billah Mink. You understand what that means, right? When you say A'udhu Billah, what do you say? A'udhu Billah Minash Shaitan. And what did she say? A'udhu Billah Mink, from you. I seek the salvation of Allah from you. So the poor woman, in all sincerity, and when Rasulullah walked in, she said it. So Rasulullah says, قَدْ أُوصِتِ بِشَيْءٍ عَظِيمٍ, or something like it. He says, you have taken you have sworn in the name of something enormous, I'm so scary that you have to seek the protection of Allah from me. So this marriage is never going to work. This marriage is never going to work. So he says, okay, you know what? Let's call it off. So did he understand what the story was about? What prompted her to say that? No. He finds out later. I've just given you one story. There are so many such incidents out there. This is one part of his life. This is one part of his life. And if you don't understand that part of his life, you don't understand the burden he was carrying, the responsibility he had. It just saddens me that Muslims really don't understand the burden he carried. It was enormous. I just gave you one. There are about 5 or 6 major burdens that he carried at the same time. The other is this ongoing conflict between the Banu Umayyah and the Banu Hashim. The two major clans in Makkah were the Hashim and the Umayyad. And everything that happened in the life of the Prophet ﷺ was either directly or indirectly connected to that. He couldn't rid himself of that. Just couldn't. And then it just exploded. When Rasulullah leaves the world, it explodes. You know what happens after that, right? Then Abu Bakr is made Khalifa. The Prophet's daughter is very unhappy, and she remains unhappy, and she remains that way for 6 months, and then eventually she leaves the world. And only after she leaves the world does Ali radiallahu anhu go to Abu Bakr and says, I now pledge allegiance to you. Couldn't do that whilst Fatima was alive. So all this intrigue was all intertwined in the life of the Prophet ﷺ himself. The challenge he faced, and the one that you're familiar with, but perhaps not the depth and the extent of it, is the challenge he faced with the hypocrites. When you when you start looking at these things looking at Rasulullah in that light, you're left with one person and a small group of people with him, very small group of people with him. You're left with one person and a small group of people with him. And this group became the core of the leadership of Islam. And front and center in that group is Ali radiallahu anhu. He was totally and utterly dependent on Ali for his help of all kinds. So this was the burden that the Prophet ﷺ carried. And then there's revelation itself, which came to him, and then it comes to him with such a force that the legs of the camel or the horse would start to buckle. This is revelation. And all of that gets lost when you read these books. And I don't know if these books, if there's a way of kind of giving you that message that this was a major tussle. Very hard. Very, very hard. The Quran makes it easy when we talk about Musa alayhi salam. It makes it very easy when you talk about Ibrahim alayhi salam. I mean, think about Ibrahim alayhi salam being put in the fire. You can see the drama of that. But it doesn't, it does that with Rasulullah, but it's the entire story. You have to look at the story in that way. He's a man who's given this mission and then has to kind of fight against these forces. And not all of these forces are just kafirs. These are within the community itself. And it makes it very, very difficult. So you have to truly appreciate how much we owe the Prophet ﷺ. You have to look at these things. These are all, and it's all in the Quran. It is all there. I shared the verse with you the other day. In tatuba ila Allah faqad sagat qulubukuma. Quran is speaking directly to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. But just like you, all of the companions were concerned about, should we ask, shouldn't we ask? Should we ask, shouldn't we ask? They didn't know who these two were. In tatuba, if you know, tatuba means two people. In tatuba ila Allah faqad sagat qulubukuma. Your two hearts have kind of gone in the wrong direction. Wives of the Prophet ﷺ. So he had an enormous challenge. And if you go back now and read the Sirah with that in mind, of someone who's carrying this challenge, is carrying this burden, a very different relationship with him should inshallah emerge. And I just have to say this repeatedly, that when we think about religious leaders now, we think about people who are accomplished, we think about people that are highly respected. Unless you know somebody who is scorned and chastised. I mean, there's a Turkish scholar who died this year, I think. Mahmoud Effendi. Very pious man, extremely pious. But the image that I'm trying to dispel with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it fits him. If you had to be there in Medina when he was there on Umrah, you would be amazed at the love and respect he had. The entire back section of the Masjid Nabawi, that open courtyard, was just packed with his followers, his disciples. He started life very humbly. He started life during the bad old days of the Kemalist government in Turkey, and he started life by just teaching madrasa. Just madrasa, alif ba ta. That's what he taught. And then when he died, he was considered a spiritual giant in Turkey, in Egypt, in India, in Pakistan. Great scholars took the journey just to go and greet him and meet him. That was not Rasulullah. That's not the Prophet ﷺ. Right to the last day when he leaves this world. The last day. You generally don't know how much you want to share with people, otherwise people go away with. I suppose that's why scholars don't talk about it. The last day the Prophet ﷺ asks for a pen and a paper. so he can write down some wasiyah in his bedroom. So Omar is there, Ali radiallahu anhu is there, the Banu Hashim are there, lots of people, everyone is standing there, and they all, and he asked for it, and then very, very unsettling, because he wants them to write down some wasiyah, and they say, no, Rasulullah is not feeling well. Rasulullah is not feeling well. And the matter is left like that. But here's an indication of the challenge, the burden he had to carry. And these are not obscure stories. This is not something that is found in some book out there in the corner. These are all authentic traditions. That Rasulullah asked for a piece of paper, he asked for a pen so that he could give some advice. And people, you seriously want to second guess the Prophet ﷺ and say, well, he's not feeling well? This is a very sore point with the Shia, by the way. But they're very selective in the way they present this argument, which is not right. They say that Omar said that he should not be given that paper. And Ali was standing right there. They didn't do that. That Ali was right there. It was not just Omar. My point is not to debate that particular issue. My point is simply to point out that if you think that Rasulullah left this world when Mahmud Effendi left this world, there were tens of thousands of people right around the village. That's the kind of respect he had. Simple madrasa teacher. So you have to kind of reconfigure your understanding of who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in terms of the burdens he carried. They were enormous. Sometimes he would talk about it. He says, istiqamah, this kind of being on, it's the key to success. Istiqamah is the key to success. Istiqamah means what? Anyone's translating for me? Steadfastness, there you go. Steadfastness, to be on it. Every one of you, inshallah, alhamdulillah, you're all accomplished in your own way. If there's one thing you will agree, that istiqamah is the key to success. You have to prod and be on it all the time. There's no success without that. In anything. Hifz, medicine, engineering, you have to be at it all the time. And he says, it has just turned me grey. Being steadfast turned me grey. قد شيبتني الاستقامة. Turned me grey. Next question. Less weighty. Any question you want to ask? Yeah. He had some ease in his life. That ease is upstairs, not here. That ease is upstairs, not here.
You mentioned last week about the battles. In the modern world, there is no hand-to-hand battle, right? Like if you have atrocities where people sit, Lincoln and Gaza with a push of a button, they destroy a whole village. In situations like that, not just Muslim versus non-Muslim, how do you debate that, and how do you come back to that?
Look, I mean, after I've been sharing this is my own opinion. I've been sharing it with my colleagues mainly, and then I thought maybe I should drop it on you, and obviously kind of fell on you, right? I'm not unmindful of the verse of the Quran, وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ. This is a very powerful verse of the Quran, and you should prepare what you can in terms of warfare and things like that. تُرْهِبُونَ بِهِ عَدُوَّ اللَّهِ وَعَدُوَّكُمْ. And it shouldn't be nominal. It shouldn't just be saying, okay, I've got a dagger in my, the fact the Quran is endorsing exactly what you're saying. It says your preparedness should be at the highest level. So you should have atomic weapons, and you should have this, and you should have, that's what the Quran seems to be pointing towards. Whatever you can, you should do it. And that goes against what I'm saying. My point is that that particular verse applied to Arabia in the 7th century. If you apply that verse to humanity in the 21st century, it is catastrophic. It is catastrophic. It will destroy human beings at large. If China and the United States go to war, there's immediate consequences, there's intermediate consequences, and there are long-term consequences. I don't think that verse is asking us to do that. You understand what I'm saying? And again, this is my own opinion. I could be entirely wrong. But I think warfare is today, it is so harmful. It is so harmful that you cannot endorse any kind of war. You cannot. It is destructive. And those who are engaged in warfare, you look at the irony of this war between Ukraine and Russia. Russia can end this whole war in 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, that entire battle is over. Right or wrong? You just nuke Ukraine, done. And hope that nobody nukes you. But everyone understands the consequences of that. Catastrophic consequences. So even, let's just assume that America is right in calling Putin insane. Even Putin in his insanity is not willing to press that button. What does that tell you about the nature of war today? War is going to destroy humanity. You can't possibly participate in a war of that magnitude. What are you left with? Think about the stunted babies that will be born for decades to come. The consequences of nuclear war are just ghastly. So that's my take on that, and I'm fully cognizant of the Quran asking us to, and strategically, I don't think we have the capacity to take on anyone. We're lucky. We got very lucky with atomic power in Pakistan, but that's it. I don't think we have the capacity to do this kind of stuff. We just don't have. We don't have the will. We don't have the finances. We don't have the intellectual capacity to do what? I mean, these guys. I was looking at the latest stealth bomber. It's like it's not in the air. We can't build a single plane. To quote Indira Gandhi, and she was being very naughty when she said that. Said, let them make toothpaste first before they make atomic bombs. And then Pakistan shows them, we can actually make it and explode it. But generally, our weaponry is being purchased from America. We have filled in Saudi Arabia with all kinds of fancy weapons. It's not our weapons. It's not our weapons. The Saudi Arabians can only use that weapon for one reason and one reason alone. To defend itself or to attack Iran. That's it. There are no other enemies that Saudi Arabia would be able to protect itself from. Next question.
I have a question that's somewhat removed from this.
Okay. Yeah. Good. I want something somewhat removed.
I wanted to get your perspective on the order of revelation versus the order of compilation of the Quran. I suspect everybody else knows the answer to this, but I don't. But were there any instructions left by the Prophet, peace be upon him, on how the Quran should be compiled in comparison to the order in which it was revealed?
You understand the question first? Yeah, he's being very honest. He's being very modest about it. The Quran came down in a certain sequence. For example, the first surah that came down was Iqra, right? Or at least the first four verses of Surah Iqra, right? But Iqra doesn't appear in the first part of the Quran. So that's the order of revelation as opposed to the order of compilation. And your question obviously is why are the two not? Because revelation came depending on circumstances, and circumstances were not sequenced. In other words, this like this verse of the Quran that says, "Oh Muhammad, oh the Prophet of Allah, why do you make haram that which Allah makes halal? Lima tuharrimu ma halallahu lak." It is in which surah? Surah Tahrim. So it appears much later. So the what is called the sabab, the cause of revelation, is not, does not have a particular order to it. It's not like, okay, I'm going to do this today and the Quran is going to come down, and then I'm going to do something else tomorrow. You see, that's what prompted revelation. The other thing that prompted revelation, which is not found in sabab categorically, is the community reaches a certain level of maturity. And then the verses are revealed. So, example, you have the verses that make haram wine. There are 4 verses on this. The one tells you, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ. They ask you about wine. قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرُ, right? قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. So they ask you about this. The person who was asking about this repeatedly was actually Umar radiallahu anhu. There were others as well, but Umar was particularly perturbed by the time it was taking for the Quran to make a definitive prohibition. Because he had a problem himself, by the way. So so this verse comes down, he says, no, there's some bad in it, some good in it. And so when you listen to a verse like that verse already kind of prepares you mentally for a moment in the future where a new rule will apply. And then eventually it says, إِنَّمَا الْخَمْرُ وَالْمَيْسِرُ وَالْأَنصَابُ وَالْأَزْلَامُ رِجْسٌ مِّنْ عَمَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. It says, all of these 4 or 5 categories of practices are the devil's workshop, or it's filth from the devil. So stay away from it if you want to be successful. But there's a big timeline that separates the two. There's nothing that prompted that. So you have events that are prompt, like with the verse, and then there's no particular event that prompted it, but the community itself underwent a certain maturation. It matured. So there's a third element to what you're saying. So the sequence of compilation and the sequence of revelation. Revelation was dependent on these 2 things: that instant event, instant solution, and then Allah in His wisdom says, well, the community is ready for this now, but not ready for that now, not ready for that now, and so on. So that's why you have this. You have this kind of lack of synchronicity. They're not synchronous because the events take place in different times.
So, how was the order of compilation then agreed upon?
How did people agree on compilation?
Yes, I was wondering if there was any instructions left behind, even if they were oral, by the Prophet, peace be upon him, or was it something that was just a committee?
The interesting thing about Islam and the documentation of Islam is there's one part of it that is highly contested, and there's one part of it that is not contested. The part that is highly contested is the hadith part. No 2 scholars can agree on a single hadith. Trust me. And this has always been the case. They either disagree with regard to the narrators. It says, he's a good man. The guy says, I disagree. He's a bad man. Somebody says, I disagree. It's called ilm al-jarh wa ta'dil. Everybody's got his own opinion about just narrators. What is the meaning of the verse? Does it apply today? So they've always had this fight. Huge political fights in Islam. Huge political fights. You would think that in order to resolve a political fight, what is the easiest way to resolve for a community that is based on revelation and the Quran? What would be the easiest way to resolve a political fight? Pull out a verse of the Quran and says, or pull out a verse and say, this is in the Quran. But there is no evidence whatsoever. No evidence whatsoever. Ahadith, there's 600,000 ahadith, if somebody tells you most of the ahadith are rejected, you're going to have to say yes, because that's true. But there isn't a single verse in the Quran that is what is called mukhtalafi, that where people have a difference of opinion. That's an amazing accomplishment. And I'm saying this because if you pay attention to what's happening in Quranic studies in the past 40 or 50 years, then you would know there's a huge debate going on about this. And the debate is in fairness, and here's what you must understand. When you make throw down a challenge, you should expect that people are going to take up the challenge. So when you tell people that there are no contradictions in the Quran, I forget now. لَوَجَدُوا فِي اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. You'd find lots of controversies about it. No controversies about it. لو كان من عند الله لوجدوا فيه اختلافا كثيرا. That if the Quran came from some other, you'd find lots of no controversies in the Quran. There are controversies about what a verse means, but no controversy about that verse being a verse. And yet the natural thing would have been for people at that time to do what? If the Quran was compiled at that time and pieces fell off here and pieces fell off, you want to talk about mu'jiza, that is a miracle right there. This Quran is pretty big. It's pretty big. It's about 6,000 odd verses. Nothing fell off. Nothing fell off. Now, there are opinions out there, there are actually statements out there in the Shia community, for instance, and I don't mean the Shia community in the year 2022, but in Shiaism throughout its history, that because Uthman compiled the Quran and put it together, therefore he left out all the verses that spoke about Ali as being the successor to the Prophet ﷺ. So those are the verses he left out, because Uthman was from the Banu Umayyah and Ali was from the. Now you see the conflict between Banu Umayyah and Banu Hashim. The problem there is, Ali never took up the argument. Ali himself never took up the argument. You understand what I'm saying? Hey, where's that verse that made... Ali should have brought that up in the first place, right? I mean, when they appointed Abu Bakr, Ali would say, oh, hold it. There's a verse out there that... You see how absurd this whole thing is? If you understand just this one point, there are hundreds like that. And so, there are some Shias who make that argument. And then Sunnis, what they do is they don't take a paintbrush, they take a 20-liter drum of paint and they just splash it across the entire Shia community for 1400. This is there. These guys are kafirs. You know why? Because they don't believe in the Quran. They say the part of the Quran is been. You see how absurd this becomes on our side as well? I mean, if I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about any respectable scholar would have taken the time out and says, well, there are these verses, there are these statements there that these Shias have made. Has anyone actually counted it from amongst the Shias? For every one person who made the statement, there are 10 people who counted that and says, no, that's not true. In the entire history of Islam, you go right down to the first day, you find a Shia Quran that makes that argument. No. So this idea that Shias don't believe in the Quran is patently false. Are there Shias who make this statement? The Shias make some crazy statements. You know what the Shias say? Who is Allah? Ali. There's a group that they're given a name. They call Ali Ilahis. But that's not true of all Shias. And if you want it from the Sunni side, I can give you some really interesting examples in Sunni Islam of people making such absurd statements. Absurd statements. So you either judge the veracity of a community on the overall view that they carry, or you pick up these little pieces there and says, because of this, therefore that. That's looking at one Shia and then taking this big drum of paint and throwing it on all of them and say, all of them are kafirs. Astaghfirullah. I challenge anyone to go out there, find a Quran that is a Shia Quran. There is no such thing. And yet, if you want to win an argument against another Muslim, what is the easiest way to do that? Quran. They should have done that in the first place. They didn't do it. They didn't do it in the first year, the 10th year, the 50th year. Didn't do it. So, do you want to have a community that is united in its generalities? Then you should overlook these exceptional statements coming from Shias. But if you want to pick a fight with everyone, and yet you want to have a country like Pakistan that should be united, you can't have it both ways. You can't have, you can't be underscoring they don't believe in the Quran, but they're Muslims. It can't be. And coming back to the question itself, never in the history of Islam have two Muslims fought. Never. Never in the history of Islam have two Muslims fought about whether this verse is in the Quran or not. Nobody has ever done that. Shias have concocted verses in the Quran. Let me read you one. Alam nashrah laka sadrak wa wada'na anka wizrak alladhi anqada dhahrak. You Hafiz, you're not a Hafiz, you don't know this. Let me teach you this. Alladhi anqada dhahrak wa rafa'na laka dhikrak wa ja'alna aliyan waliyak. In the Quran. wa ja'alna aliyan waliyak. Now go out there, go to Dearborn and check out the Quran. Find there in that particular surah, see if it's in there. Somebody stuck it in there. He says, well, that's evidence that these people have, they show ambivalence to it. I'll show you. Egyptian scholar comes to America, spends his life here writing about the Quran, and then he says the last part of the surah shouldn't be there. Sunni. What is this part of the Sunni? Rashad Khalifa. Heard of him? You remember Rashad Khalifa? Rashad Khalifa. Astaghfirullah. What is that verse of the Quran? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if you want to avoid this as a Muslim, you've got this. I mean, you've got something solid in the Quran, solid. And if you pay attention to this like I do, and because it's what I do for a living, it's initially very disturbing, very disturbing. But once you understand it, that's the basic argument I made. That no Muslim has ever challenged the Quran, never. The easiest way to win an argument in Islam. The easiest way, but nobody's ever challenged that. What they do now, and you might find it on the net, it says this verse was not, they were looking for this verse and they couldn't find this verse, and they only found it by Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu. So you say, Astaghfirullah. So, I mean, this is a Zaydi concoction. See the point? This is a Zaydi concoction. There's a guy who wrote a very interesting article, fascinating article, that this Quran we have here only came about in the year 1921 or 1911 when the Egyptian government commissioned a group of scholars to give a final canonized version of the Quran. So all the Egyptian scholars got together and they put together this Quran. And if you read that, it's shocking. It scares you. You say, man, this just happened now. This just happened now. Until you realize, okay, if what you're saying is true, that the Egyptian government commissioned a group of, it's there. If somebody wants it, don't ask me to look for it, but it's well known that he has written about this. That the Egyptian government commissioned a group of scholars, and they got this. And if you open some of these Qurans, you'll actually find that there's evidence for that. I looked at one the other day, and they don't have it, and I said, "Wow, I'm surprised they don't have it." What printing houses do is when they print the Quran, then they get a group of ulama who have to sit down and look at the Quran, and then they have you seen that? Then they sign off on it. That is to say that we have actually read this Quran and it is in conformity with the Quran. Because you could start up something tomorrow, a printing house, and then the French did it, by the way, 10 years ago. They took out all these verses that said negative things about women, and so there's a lot of stuff going on out there. So the point is that when the Egyptian government commissioned these scholars, that's exactly what they were doing. I haven't had the time to actually respond to this, guys, but there's a very simple response. Very simple response. He says, Ya Akhil Karim, tafsir of Ibn Kathir and the Quran we have today is exactly the same. The tafsir of Ibn Kathir, which was written in the 13th century, it's a tafsir of all the verses in the Quran. They're all there. The tafsir of Tabari, which is 300 years older than that. So which Quran are you talking about that the Egyptian government put together? Which Quran are you talking about? Sometimes, here's the problem. Sometimes you ask yourself, it takes a lot of time and energy to respond to these people. Because you have to do it in a very systematic way. If you graduated from high school in this country and you went to college and so on, then you know that doing term papers is not a fun thing. So you just up that 10 notches and you suddenly realize, oh my God, to respond to this guy, it's going to take a lot of energy. The problem is we have our own challenges. Do we focus on this or do we focus on our own challenges? For example, we have a whole debate on riba, unresolved. Should we pay attention to one person? And there's so many such claims. Should we pay attention to this person's claim that this Quran has been put together by the Egyptian government 110 years ago? Or should we just say, okay, good luck with that? At some point, you just have to say, good luck with that. We have to move on. We have to move on. We have some serious challenges we have to come to terms with. And these are distractions. So I learned this from one very important scholar. And he says, we just don't have the time for this. Our resources are limited. We can't be answering every criticism. We just can't do it. Unfortunately, 90% of Islamic scholarship just goes into just reading and doing the old traditional stuff. There are all these new Islamic institutions coming up in America. They're all involved in doing the same thing, just repeating the old stuff. And nobody's going to pay attention. You need special skills to do this, and they're not trained to do this. They're not trained to do that. Next question. Yes, sir.
So, from all the pressure that Muslim had in his life, was the revelation, because I know there's something to speak about revelation was a bit factor of stress. Was it the fact that the revelation itself is very stress? When I say revelation, I mean the revelation in separation from the mission itself and the struggle for it. Like just
all of it was stressful. All of it was stressful. So when he says, I find peace and tranquility in the salah, you better believe it. It was all stressful. He was an amazingly powerful human being. He was amazingly powerful. And I don't mean he had muscles, but he was enormously powerful. You know, you guys, some of you are working and you have stress at work, and you know, it just grinds at you. You know what it does to you? It grinds at you. It grinds at you. God forbid you get involved in a domestic dispute, and you know what that does to you. It's just one thing. God forbid you're afflicted by some disease. Or you, as a doctor, you're getting sued. And so you understand what stress is. Multiply that by 50 and then you see what Rasulullah had to deal with. So all the Anbiya they had enormous challenges. So we should when we come across their names, when we think about them, put that challenge, that burden of this front and center. That's who they are. They're not what is this guy's name again, quickly, before you leave? What was his name again? Sadguru. They're not Sadgurus. They're not Sadgurus. They're not sitting at Harvard and everybody's sitting there listening to them, and very popular guy. All the best universities in America welcome him. Obviously he got a huge honorarium as well. He's doing well for himself. So don't compare Rasulullah to that. This was a very difficult mission. Next question.
Can you elaborate on what you think it means to follow the Prophet, given that he was a prophet and a man at the same time, and also in light of the companions being very diverse and different from one another?
Well, each one of us tries to follow him to the best of our ability. But here's the thing, the more you try to follow him, the more difficult it becomes. Your life will not become easier. To put it bluntly, your life will not become easier. Your life will become more difficult. Your life will become more difficult. You will have these moments of there's a word for it in English called beatitude. You know, you feel really good. But those are fleeting moments. Those are fleeting moments. But life would become... Think about fasting Mondays and Thursdays only. Just fasting Mondays and Thursdays, that's all. Not a difficult thing to do. But every week, for the rest of your life. Then you suddenly say, oh my God, oh yeah, that is tough. Winters in America, good. Summers in America? So yes, each one of us tries to follow the sunnah of the Prophet in our own way. But the more you try, the more difficult it becomes. The more difficult it becomes. Next question.
Not really a question, but to add to the point, you can
Ladies also, if you have a question. Yeah.
the Quran was compiled by Prophet Sallallahu so there was if it was being compiled incorrectly, Prophet Sallallahu himself corrected order. So just that.
The point is, there's no conflict in early Islam about anything. There are some conflicts, and people outside Islam, they bring it up. So, for instance, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud had his own written surah. I don't know if he had the entire Quran written. I'm just kind of intrigued by how difficult it would be to have an entire Quran written in the old days when people used parchment and skin and so on. You know, you think of the book like a book. It's not a book, it's skin. And it's Arabia, so how much of skin can you have? You see my point? So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud had a Quran, and in that Quran of his, he had وَتَكُونُ الْجِبَالُ كَالصُّوفِ الْمَنْفُوشِ. The word is not su. What is the word? What is the word in the Quran? Kal'ih. But ihan is not a Meccan word. Now you see the point. So because it's not a Meccan word, he doesn't know what it meant. So he got the translation from someone, and you know you do this sometimes yourself. I do it often. That if you don't understand a word, you kind of put, you put a note there. So he put a note there, so people says, look, he had a different way of reading it. Be that as it may, the point is that all you got? Is that all you got? Is that the only evidence you have to show that there were conflicts amongst the companions and so on? The most compelling argument is actually made by the Shia themselves when they say Ali, and I'm talking about a fringe element of the Shia, that Uthman very selectively left out all the verses that spoke about Ali being the successor to Rasulullah. Nobody objected to it. No one objects to it. It makes no sense. Ali himself doesn't object to it. Fatima doesn't object to it. And Fatima had a huge problem with Abu Bakr. She had a problem with him about the farmland, about the garden called Fadak. Didn't have a problem about Ali not being mentioned in the Quran. You see how absurd this whole thing becomes then? It's not like these people where they got along, very well. They didn't. We try and make up this whole thing about they got along very well. They didn't get along well. They had some, I was thinking maybe I should do this, maybe not now. I don't want to burden you too much. There are 5 major fitnas in early Islam. So we could go through the 5, and maybe by the 3rd fitna you're so tired, you say, okay, I need a time out. I'm not going to sit for this anymore. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. I don't know how you feel now. Hope inshallah not too bad. We've been teaching classes like this for the past 23 years. Alhamdulillah, it's one of our grads sitting right there. We have now professor of Islamic Studies at Yale. We have a professor of Islamic Studies at Michigan MSU. We have professors of medicine, all of us in America. We have them in Poland. We have them in England. We have now we had people from and the objective there was simply to address the questions that cannot be addressed anywhere else. So you come in and it's not a happy experience. Am I right, Rumi? Because it takes you into some of the questions we raised here in here, and it requires a great deal of deliberation and so on. Anyway, I don't know if I answered your question. Anyone else? Ladies? No? Yeah, so if we do this, we do the 5. What I want to talk about next, if we have the time, is, did you put it up yet? We're talking about Rumi? Yeah. Anyone heard of Rumi? So here's the interesting thing about Rumi. Jalaluddin Rumi. Rumi is, you wouldn't believe it, Rumi is the most celebrated poet in America, bar none. The most celebrated poet in America is Rumi. And Americans don't see the connection between Rumi and Islam. They asked a philosopher, if the entire world had to burn up, what would you like to have with you? And he says, I would like to have the Mathnavi with me. And he was secular, French secular philosopher. So the reason I find Rumi intriguing is because, oh yes, by the way, the most reviled Muslim leader is the Prophet ﷺ amongst non-Muslims. Amongst non-Muslims, when you think about Buddha, you think good things about him. All of these people come out smelling good, but not Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Rumi, very highly respected. People love him. Go into the bookstores, go to Barnes and Noble and so on, you will find Rumi there. You will find Rumi. So that's the challenge we face as Muslims. We are celebrated. And Rumi is nothing but what? He is Islam. You might disagree with some of his ideas on Islam. That's a different issue. But he embodies Islam in every possible way. His entire poetry is about Islam. In fact, they say, Hasta Quran dar Zabane Farsi. The book of Rumi is actually
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Quran in Farsi.